I've kind of been in the most like unkind reading slump. Honestly, it's not even like from the start of the year. Like it's been like this since December. I finished Acts of Desperation, I focused on school, and then I was like, okay, my post grad like read would be Indivisible by Fanny Howell, which I'm still considering myself like currently reading that. I just put it on the back burner for a bit because I think I'm in the mood for something else. So I did start reading something else. I picked up Noor Naga's debut novel, If an Egyptian Cannot Speak English, because Charon from Batuman's So Idiot had like spoken really highly of this novel. I did pick this one up today and it's funny and I'm actually really enjoying it in a way that I don't think I didn't know what to expect, to be quite honest. The first section, which is where I'm at, is written in this sort of like, there's a question that's posed and then the answer is a story. And we're seeing it from a dual POV. There's also some like time jumping. So like one of the characters is in the present and then the other character, at least for now, he's sort of recounting how he moves to Cairo. So I guess both of them are in like this transitory, should probably like say what the book is about. But basically, the synopsis is, in post-Arab Spring, Cairo, two unnamed characters meet and fall in love. She is a nostalgic daughter of Egyptian immigrants returning to a country she's never been to before. He was a photographer of the revolution who is now unemployed and living in a rooftop shack. As their alternating perspectives unfold in blocks of taut, poetic prose, their desire for each other, for the selves they strive to become through the other, takes a violent turn. A dark romance exposing the fraught fissures in American identity politics when exported overseas. If an Egyptian Cannot Speak English is a lush post-colonial novel for the 21st century. So yeah, I'm still very, like, early days, to quote Love Island. It's like darkly funny and like the first page was very much my, oh yeah, like my reminder of like, this is a novel written by a poet. Funny enough, similarly to Acts of Desperation, the really short chapters, I mean, they're not really chapters, but the really short like format of the questions and the answers is making it such a read that you can like in one sitting finish it. So I'm definitely excited to read this and to talk about it more. This is definitely like a really good first start to the year. It's also dealing with like diaspora, like anxieties and grief, race and gender and class. It's doing a lot of things that I thought was really interesting. And the form of the novel is obviously something that has been praised about it because it's also doing a lot of like really interesting things. I read this really quickly. I was sick and I had time off, so I was just like going through this really quickly. It follows two unnamed characters and it's kind of like about their doomed romance. It's this Egyptian American girl who it's like, Trump's elected, it's like Trump's America, she's over it. She's very much the sort of woke, progressive, to a fault kind of, in the sense of the way that was co-opted by like neoliberalism. There's a lot of interesting ways that her character functions as a critique of like the American left. I don't know, part of it made me uncomfortable, but I'll get to that at some point. But yeah, so she is like, okay, I've never been to Egypt, but I'm from, my parents are from there, so I'm moving back, returning, to Egypt. And so she goes to Cairo. And then the other unnamed character is a boy from Cairo. He's from a village called Shobrakit. He moves to Cairo during like the Arab Spring, and he moves there to sort of his position in the revolt and protest and like revolution effort was as a photographer. And within his story there's obviously this sort of commentary on the Arab Spring and on like photojournalism and as a tool to like criticize like war and criticize like the atrocities of a horrible regime, right? An oppressive regime, but also the sort of unintended consequences that follow through. The way that the photographs that like photojournalists have been used to like identify protesters and arrest arrest them and like target them and put them in danger. There's a way that his character is also like this point that the authenticity of an Egyptian Cairo experience is expressed in the novel, and then obviously she sort of plays up the interloper, the foreigner, where foreigner comes with its own privileges in a way that like on the flip side in context in like the US, like foreigner, depending on like where the foreigner is coming from, it denotes a completely different thing. So yeah, there's like these multi-layered roles that the characters play, but then there's also the way that like in this relationship that they begin to build, the way gender plays, because I forgot to mention, right, like in Cairo she sort of looked at sort of like in a different like odd derogatory, disapproving way because she's bald. She shaved her head. It's an unexpected thing. So there's the way like gender and like sexism come into play, and contextual reasons for that, which does not excuse it, obviously. Yeah, I think Sharon was saying in her review where she was talking about how like, yes, obviously, she is experiencing like sexism and misogyny, but then she has all of these privileges. Like she's from a wealthy or like an upper middle class US family, and so everything's kind of taken care of for her. Like she has this apartment that her mom is able to get her through her mom's friend. She has like this job that she doesn't really need. She's making more money than these people can make. And so part of why let me consult my notes, right? But I had written that the relationship is doomed from the start. Their backgrounds, different biases, and life experiences precludes them from truly seeing the other. Add to the fact that both their perceptions of themselves and each other make them defensive, so they're trying to read each other and to read themselves, their positions, what they're entitled to in the relationship and in the world as a whole, their advantages and privileges through each other. Thinking of it in terms of like communication and like language, because she speaks English and she speaks bad, her Arabic is bad, and he doesn't speak English very well, and so they have these, for this her authentic Cairo experience, like he becomes her guide, he takes her to like, he shows her the right markets to go to, the right, places to basically like frequent, and he's homeless, and like she kind of like lets him live with her, but the relationship sort of gets more and more fraught because they harbor these like attitudes towards each other, like these tiny resentments. He's very resentful of her position, her class position, her like Americanness, her ability to escape what they are going through, right? And then she is filled with all of this desperate guilt. She's filled with guilt of the things that he's like accusing her of, and so the relationship is beneficial for the same reasons that it's doomed. He's able to sort of be her way to like be self-flagellating and like focus on the ways that she is privileged and all of that, and then he has a person to get all of his problems on, and language makes it hard for them to read each other, but also they're using themselves to make sense of themselves. Like he is using her to sort of get into places that he would not have access to because he's read as like this poor, vagrant, like homeless guy on the street, and then she is able to sort of get that authenticity. What else did I want to talk about? The second part of the novel is a bit more straightforward, and it includes like footnotes of like, explaining like Egyptianisms for lack of a better term, but basically like in the way that a translated work, and mostly translated works from like the third world or whatever, they would translate like things that would be italicized, you know, like food or a slang word. There's a way that as readers we're also drawn to sort of trust, because that tends to happen during his POV. So there's a way that we as readers are pulled in to sort of trust his authenticity and to trust his authority as our authentic Egyptian in the story. You know, the novel, I thought it was a really like bold and like inventive, and I love a debut that's like trying a lot. So I think maybe some of the things that I'm dealing with, like how I feel about it, probably has to do with like the cancel culture and like wokeness, and trying to like, yeah, I think I wrote trying to make sense of how the novel is commenting on these things gives me a headache. Because it's not quite satire, but it's also doing some fun, interesting things with that is like, I wonder where you're going, you know. But yeah, I think on my Bookstagram I wrote a lot about like how everything is precarious when I think obviously the way that race and gender and class sort of rule our lives, it takes on this sort of objective heavy weight, you know, and like language, like it takes on, like it shapes so much of our lives, but like these things are so precarious, and you only, or you tend to ignore that until you're placed in a completely different context, and then you have to grapple with like shifting norms and like shifting power dynamics and shifting positions, and then you're like, nothing is stable at all. And so here, like, this is a good example of the way that plays, like where race and gender, like everything is so slippery and so precarious, and what more to now like try to show that within a relationship that's like toxic and abusive and so precarious too, because if you care about spoilers, you know, like, sorry. There was a really interesting part in the novel where both of them kind of acknowledged the thing with their relationship, which is that she is eventually going to leave. She's doing this like her trip, this enlightenment like trip, right? And everyone is sort of reading her, and like he's definitely reading her in the sense of like, you get to leave. And so that makes their relationship so fraught. I really think more and more people should read If an Egyptian Cannot Speak English by Noor Naga. And I'm honestly interested in like checking out her poetry, because I do like her like sentences. Yeah, very clever. And then, you know, the third part, like everyone's kind of like keeping it spoilery, but it's, let's say it gets meta. And it definitely is another way that the reader is like pulled in and like forced to confront your own like biases and your own I don't know, I just thought it was like a really clever novel. So wonderful first novel of the year. Okay, while I'm on a roll, I am currently reading Negroland by Margo Jefferson. The synopsis says, you know, it's a deeply felt meditation on race, sex, and American culture through the prism of the author's rarefied upbringing and education among a black elite concerned with distancing itself from whites and the black generality while tirelessly measuring itself against both. Born in upper-class black Chicago, her father was for years head of pediatrics at Providence, at the time the nation's oldest black hospital. Her mother was a socialite. Margo Jefferson has spent most of her life among, call them what you will, the colored aristocracy, the colored elite, the blue vein society. Since the 19th century, they have stood apart, these inhabitants of Negroland, a small region of Negro America where residents were sheltered by a certain amount of privilege and plenty. Reckoning with the strictures and demands of Negroland are crucial historical moments. The civil rights movement, the dawn of feminism, the fallacy of post-racial America. Jefferson brilliantly charts the twists and turns of a life informed by psychological and moral contradictions. Aware as it is of heart-wrenching despair and depression, this book is a triumphant paean to the grace of perseverance. I'm only like 52 pages into this. I started reading this like a few days ago, and I'm definitely hoping to take my time. I'm really, really excited reading this. My first like thought as I was reading was how much she's performing on the page. And I've listened to a little bit of an interview that like Doreen St. Felix did with Margo Jefferson for her second memoir, Constructing a Nervous System, which I can't wait to get to. But like from the interview, she's very like vivacious. She just comes off as this very like extroverted, creative, you know, endearing, like charming woman, and it really, really comes across on the page. Like, so one of my first notes was how like exhilarating her voice is in the memoir. You know, I'm finding myself sort of being confronted with my ideas of like what a memoir should be. I haven't read like Annie Ernaux, but like there's a way that, you know, I don't know, I feel I took a memoir writing class last year, and one of the huge things for me was like, oh, I actually don't know what a memoir is, and I don't know like what a memoir is supposed to look like. And I also feel like a lot of like the two big pieces that I did for that class were more personal essay than memoir. But yeah, it's a sort of form that to me is like elusive. Like when I think memoir, I honestly think personal essay, so I think of like Durga Chulis's Too Much and Not the Mood, which I loved a lot. And then I think of like the sort of semi-autobiographical works by these sort of like writerly women, such as like The Lover by Marguerite Duras. But coming to this, right, is completely blowing my mind. So far from what I can tell, like this is very much like part memoir, part criticism. In my notes, I'm like, she sort of begins her memoir with this performance of the chronicler, this allegorical tale of a girl of Negroland, and she describes what Negroland is, and it's these like colored elites, these black elites, and then she sort of goes into criticizing, you know, like other chroniclers, and she's tracing like Negroland through history and in the history of American blacks, hoping to sort of like advance or rise above their like racial condition. And so she's pulling aside like the works and like the narratives of these 19th century and 20th century chroniclers, like these black chroniclers of this esteemed society. And like, I don't know, this is something like really, really interesting in how she's doing it. And there's like interesting critiques of like, you know, black exception. I mean, we all, you know, talk about like American exceptionalism, but there's something about like the sort of response to that with like, you know, black exceptionalism and the idea of wanting to advance and like to sort of gain the same sort of like privileges of bourgeois society, and a lot of times that is at the expense of other black people who are not able to transcend blackness in the same way. And it's not to say that these people are transcending blackness, but there is a way that they kind of are. You can see that like Negroland is inhabited by like the free, privileged, bourgeois, educated, often mixed racial ancestry. She sort of spends some time sort of going through the works of these black chroniclers and these writers of black history, society, life, aspirations, faults, deviations. And there's a way that in doing that, she's also situating herself as a memoirist and as a chronicler of her own black life and its far reaches, her parents. And yeah, I don't know, like Margo Jefferson, I keep being like, she's so brilliant, because there's a, you know, like I said, like there's a way to do memoir. There's a way she could have done this and just like straightforwardly written about her life, but the fact that, you know, there's this sort of critical eye, because she's also a critic, so there's this critical eye involved in wanting to provide context, to contextualize. I don't know, man, like 50 pages in and I'm like obsessed. Two really good like starts to the year. If an Egyptian Cannot Speak English by Naga, and Negroland by Margo Jefferson.